Hey everybody, my name is Andrew Bosco. I'm the CEO of the Candor Investment Group, and I actually want to take some time today to go over the new rent control ballot that's going on in Massachusetts. So for those of you that haven't heard, in Massachusetts in November coming up, there's going to be part of the ballot is going to have the topic of rent control. And there's some people that would say this is a really good thing. It's going to help with affordability. Others are going to say it's going to do the inverse. So I thought I'd take a little bit of time to kind of dive in. I made like a public website for people just to kind of reference. There's a tons of resources in here. I have 14 cited sources, so you can go take a look and see where I got the info. But I figured I would just take some time to kind of walk you guys through this. So to be honest, this is really a tale, not really like pro or for. You're going to get kind of both sides, but this is actually just a comparison of two different areas, honestly, handling affordability in different cases. And so we're going to kind of look at two different areas within the New England area to see how they're tackling the affordability crisis that's currently going on, especially in New England. So kind of looking at this, and this is only updated as of February of 2026. Things may have changed by the time you see this, so hopefully this is helpful in some capacity. And so voters are going to have the decision to say, like, what, they have the choice to vote on the ballot essentially for pro rent control or against it. Now, not here to sway you. I want you to kind of decide. There's a little bit of undecided votes here, but right now there's a support. But a little bit over 60% of people are supporting the ballot, which is great if you're in for it. Now, for those of you that are opposing it, not so great. So kind of looking at this, it's showing strong support, but I think we need to kind of dive into why. I think, to be honest, more people kind of get the surface level. They're like, the idea of rent control sounds great. You're like, oh, wow, people can live for affordable. And honestly, they're not inclined to be pushed out by gentrification. Is that actually going to happen? And so it's important to really dive into what this actually looks like. Now, this is going to impact a lot of rental properties, especially in the Boston area. Worcester's a big market, Lowell as well, Fall River. I think it's important to show right now that the public is strongly supporting rent control, but is it really the right move for what they're looking for? I think you need to kind of look here and kind of go over some key items for it. Now, for this ballot that's going to be voted in, you should really look it up, kind of dive into what the nuances are. But there's a rent cap, which means that essentially the rent cannot it cannot be increased by more than 5%, or is limited to the CPI, whichever one is lower. So that means that landlords can't raise their rent 6%. They're capped at either 5% or the CPI, whichever one is lower. Now, this really honestly moves out towards between tenants. So this can apply when a tenant moves out and there's no vacancy decontrol aspect of it, and that's important to notice. For new construction, this is actually exempt from this. So for basically like buildings with first occupancy less than 10 years are actually exempt from this law, which is an important distinction. Small owners are exempt if you're living in an owner-occupied unit under 5 units, which is a little strange. Typically, more would expect 4, but the reality is that it's actually exempt as well. And the most important thing for this ballot is that it's also across the entire state of Massachusetts. This is really unique because in other instances, these typically in cities like San Francisco or St. Paul. It's important. We're going to kind of go over those in a little bit, but that's a big distinction. It would impact the entire state of Massachusetts, which is quite unique actually. And so you can kind of take a look at data here if you want. I'll give you the website so you guys can kind of dive in. Now, what's the case for rent control, right? So like, why would somebody want it? And so the reality is that people want stability. They want to know that they can live in a place that's safe. The rent isn't going to get pulled out of control. Mayor Wu in Boston is in for it. They're basically saying, listen, and she's admitting to this, that like, this isn't perfect, but I'm not going to let perfect be the enemy of good in this case. Her goal is to make it more affordable for families. Now, that's her goal, but is it going towards the right intention? We can take a look at it. Typically, people saw a 30% rent increase coming up across 2021. That's a fact. People saw that from the COVID boom. Rents went up. And so you can kind of see just a few direct quotes here from different people, citing that scenario. Now, if we go for against rent control, this is kind of an interesting play here. Now, although Governor Maura Healey is actually a Democrat, she's not for this, which is actually rather unique versus Wu. If you look at the studies, and we're going to kind of dive into those a little bit, it's not necessarily a rent control problem. It's more of an affordability problem. And to be honest, she's looking at the investors saying, like, if you have rent control, investors are going to pull out, and that's going to cause a plethora of other issues. And so I'd like to kind of look at that, and I think this is important to talk about for the rent control, because if you kind of dive in here, you can see that, the San Francisco case is a good example. New York, St. Paul, they all had rent control, and you can see exactly what happened. In 2019, New York City tried having rent control. It completely backfired. Values on multifamily buildings dropped 30%. 1 in 4 small landlords kept honest units emptied. So even though they were vacant, they were getting the rent that they wanted. They just kept them vacant. And so people honestly and landlords stopped investing in certain areas, and it caused more of an issue from like a crime standpoint in that case. And so it's interesting when you look at this because even St. Paul in Minnesota is going through the same scenario. And just over the border, Minneapolis, they didn't do this. So in St. Paul, they had rent control and new apartments permit plummeted. They stopped building and they stopped constructing. And so there was less units the following year. The city actually rolled back the policy. Whereas in Minneapolis, they did not have rent control. And the reality is that they focused on the building aspect, making building easier. And they added 12% of more homes. Now, rent rose just over 1% at that time. It's important to know those distinctions going on. But unfortunately, when you actually have rent control, you can actually see rents actually increase, and there's a huge supply reduction, which drives the rent. It also can change the income of people that are coming into the area, because the reality is that higher incomes are required to actually go in those markets. Again, you can see the graphs here to help you out, but it's interesting because the case against it is pretty widespread. There's even cited here the American Economic Association. There is a large majority that agree that rent control is actually going to reduce the quality of housing and the quantity of housing. And the reality is that rent control in kind of the short run really will help tenants. I think that's the thing people mostly focus on, whether it's 6 months or 12 months, it'll actually help people. But in the long run, it fuels gentrification. It creates negative externalities in the surrounding neighborhood. Investors stop investing in that area. They're not incentivized to own these buildings. Now, you might be saying, great, I don't want to have investors there. But you have to understand who's actually being able to afford and buy these buildings. It's those individuals. So they're not incentivized anymore if there's rent control to have this occur, which can cause, again, gentrification, decreasing affordability in the long run. It's, and there's some cases for it where it's, it's not in favor in a strong manner. And so there's kind of an interesting piece here, because I like talking about the tale of two states, and that there's a supply issue, honestly, in the Northeast. Massachusetts has a horrible supply issue, just like New Hampshire. The only other place that's worse really in the country at this point is like Chicago. And the reality is that all have a major supply issue. Now, the biggest thing is that there's a different kind of tale here. In Manchester, New Hampshire, there is a tale of kind of like not a lot of middle housing. Now, what is middle housing? Middle housing is not single family. It's not these like massive complexes. It's those 2 families, the 3 families, the 4 families, the smaller apartment buildings. And what's really unique is that the University of New Hampshire actually did a study working with the town that the middle housing was actually dwindling pretty small, and that's because of strict zoning laws. And the reality is that the city kind of looked into it itself, the planning boards, aldermen, et cetera, everybody got together, and they essentially decided to rewrite the land use code. They made it from being this complicated, messy system to they loosened a lot of items. They made it more clean and streamlined. So ADUs are easier to build. They redefined what zoning is in certain areas to allow for more units to be built within the middle zoning area. This is kind of an important step for the city. This is showing that New Hampshire is taking the route of not rent control, but increasing the ability to actually have more housing being built, which is going to hopefully make it more affordable for individuals to come in and actually live there and kind of tackle this housing crisis. And so it's actually rather unique because New Hampshire is taking that effect, and specifically Manchester, New Hampshire. And I hope, there's a good case study in 2027 they can review where if the number of permits increases, which is the hope, that we can apply this to the rest of the state of New Hampshire. Massachusetts, on the other hand, is choosing to go statewide rent control. It'll be interesting to see how this kind of halts production over time. And I also, looking at the number of housing units being built versus not being built versus what's actually affordable in rent, the next 12 months will be interesting. This is going to go on the ballot in November of 2026. And so everyone's kind of all eyes are on Massachusetts right now because there's a lot of large scale people, individuals and small multifamily owners, and also just larger apartment complexes looking at what is going to go on the ballot and how people are going to vote. Because even though you may be for or against it, you have to think of what the long repercussions are of doing so. And so I want to make sure everybody knows that this website is out there. I've talked a lot about different philosophies. My information is here. I keep it public. Anybody's welcome to email me. I'd love to have a conversation with you. Happy to go over this if it can, hopefully making at least a halfway decent decision. My references are also on the website. So let me know if there's anything I can do. Again, this website, we'll put it in the comments or put it in the description. Anybody can have it. And again, this is more of an opinion piece, and I try to make it opinion, but based on fact. And so there's some different resources here you can reference, and hopefully that helps. It's going to help us a ton if you guys like, share, and subscribe. And it just kind of keeps the channel going. I like to make sure that we're informative for people, and hopefully this helps you guys out. So thank you so much. My name is Andrew Bosco, the CEO of the Candor Investment Group, and I'll catch up with you. Thanks.